It was me and her in that bathroom, experiencing each other for the first time.
I really felt that I had a special destiny.
Uh-huh.
And there were times when I would go outside in the nighttime and look up at the stars and I says, yes, I've been chosen.
A huge defining experience of my youth would be my 0 to 18 years old would be existing as the only black person in a white family. Um, After that, and around the time I turned 18, I would say discovering art, some version of a creative process that yeah, discovering the art and that there was like something that I could do that would connect me to other people. And then I think meeting my dad. And I think those are the three ones that I've had so far. And making the decision to um, face my dad and talk to him and hear from him and journey into blackness is that's the same. Meeting my dad is just that same um, experience, I would say. When I was 20 years old, I met my dad for the first time, and I think I put a lot of weight onto that, and I thought that this was going to tell me more. It was just going to solve things for me, and I was going to like what I found, and I found something. I met him, and it was a great experience. It didn't close a door; it opened a door, if anything. And yeah, I mean, I don't think it's ever certain. So I think it's a hard goal to ever feel like I'm gonna fully know myself. But um, I think that is still the desire that I'm following, and it takes this strength that I don't know why it's such a hard thing to do. But I think I could maybe describe my past as hiding from myself, and I think that is where the desire comes from. To at this point go enter deeper into myself.
For a while because it felt so culturally and just like literally controlling and restraining for me. I tried to just like separate myself as much as possible from that. But I also realized that there's like a lot of the healing work that I need to do involves me engaging with those dynamics and those things. Um, because my parents are like both deeply traumatized from like their life experiences, like, and you know, I kind of know the things my dad has experienced, but very vaguely. And like my mom has like expressed like what her life was like um, before immigrating here and then immigrating here. And I'm just like, damn, I can't believe you're even alive. And so um, I think who I am feels a lot of like um, feels a lot like that, and then also this other person that I am now. And the middle just feels sort of like kind of fucked up and discombobulated, and I'm trying to figure out how to connect those two things because they both feel very important.
This thing about how I relate to other people and what my expectations are of those relationships, and coming to this realization that it's possible for all of the love, nurturing, support, like feelings of validation, feelings of just like freedom and security. Maybe none of that comes from anyone else in any capacity, like on personal familial like levels, on like romantic partnership levels, on like state like maybe actually all of that's supposed to be like self-generating and like rooted in self. And I feel like when I realize that, and then when I start to like practice that, like that's where I get the joy and the like limitless happiness. But I haven't been able to like sustain that yet. Mostly when I just sit like in silence, by myself. It takes a while sometimes because like there are so many parts of myself trying to like lead that moment, but even that in a way feels like blissful, like to just be in that space, like amongst myself. I think at least for me, like I have to, like whatever joy I'm trying to generate, like has to be generated first in solitude, and then maybe I can do it in relationships with other people. Yeah.
And I think one of the first things that we have to begin to do is sit and look in the mirror and be okay with who we are. I don't know if anybody saw the Latifah Bessie Smith movie, and one of my favorite scenes in that film is when she takes off all her clothes after everybody's gone and everybody's left her, and she's in the empty house, and she disrobes in front of the mirror, and she takes off her makeup, and she sits there for quite a long beat in cinema time, and she just beholds herself. And that she doesn't flinch away, she doesn't pick at herself, she doesn't, and it's such a powerful scene to me because I think that's where we have to start.
I need a great deal more faith. Like I used to be, I mean, I think a lot of us are as kids, like really like self-motivated and self-defining, and just clear. Like we like, oh, we want that, we like that. We're not. But I've lost much of that, and I think that goes back to like the thing that we were saying about value, you know, being in spaces where like folks but at that like you said, we are not our grandfathers, our great grandfathers, our great great grandfathers or mothers. Like we have a control that they didn't get to exercise, so like why are we wasting it? And for me, I think it's fear. If I can just trust myself, right? Like if I can just trust that like I am like worthy of all of the best things, then I can make sure I'm putting myself in situations where that is possible to actually exist. Yeah. I can quit my job. And I can stop walking into situations where I'm like picking a new master.
Throughout my life, they have been a motivating force for me, whether positive or negative. And also things can be both at the same time. I think specifically in regards to like moments where I'm baseline just thinking about survival, just thinking about them and their existence and how they are still alive, definitely is like evidence that's really important for me to like have and to remember. I also feel like Black people, other trans people, I think I'm trying to feel, I think like being really empathic, it's like a lot of the times the people around me like energetically motivate me, and I also know that there's like immense power that also exists inside of me that like is motivating. I think it's just a matter of like being better at channeling it than trying to be my highest self, and also knowing that like I am that person already. It's just like a matter of visioning that and like making those choices.
Power is always conceived as power over something and not as what is my power within. And so I feel that part of our colonization as brown people, black people, Asian people is we often internalize that sense of powerlessness because we feel like, well, what's my power in relationship to the world? I don't have any, you know? And so I think that we often embrace death. You know, my brother, who's 60-some years old, a recovering addict for 25 years, just really beats himself up for not having money. And I say to him, Ken, look at the blessing of your life. How many working class black men can come back from addiction, can be born again in recovery? But on his scale of evaluation, that doesn't mean anything. And so part of what I learned early on is we have to change the scale of evaluation. Because if we continue to judge ourselves by the standards set within that imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, then we never move. Because even if we move, but we still have what I call the voice of judgment. My theory is that the dominating culture depends on the voice of judgment. You know, that even when you're succeeding, you're not good enough. Even when, you know, I didn't think I was a writer, even after I had books published. Because, you know, for me, you know, what did I think a writer would be? What would be the magic moment that I could say, I'm a writer? And that whole thing had to do with my needing some type of validation outside myself to give me power, and not to be able to think of, you know, power that I can give myself, that we can self-generate.
When I was born, I had 2 older brothers. My parents had just moved to Maryland from New York. They were very young parents. I think, both my parents were 26 when they had me. And I was the first girl, and I'm also the only chocolate one of my siblings, which is interesting. A lot of people don't believe that we're blood siblings, but we are. So I remember my parents always say this joke, like when I was born, they're like, it's a girl, and she's chocolate. And they were both like screaming it. But I think my parents did a very good job. My mom was very adamant about like raising us in a completely different environment than she did, because she went to one of the first integrated schools in Queens, New York. So she had, you know, horrible experiences as a kid, you know, rocks being thrown at her and all sorts of crazy stuff going to school. So her mission was to have us in good schools, good environment, you know, leave it to Beaver kind of kids. And so it was a very integrated area. I had a lot of mixed cultured friends. And I remember like the first time I noticed I was black, and it wasn't like, well, the first time someone told me I was black was my mom. And she was just like, don't come over here and doing that stuff from that white girl's house. And I was like, white girl? And I was like 8, and I was like, what? I was really like waiting for her to explain. And she was so livid that she was like, get out of my face. Like, and I was like, what do you mean by white girl? That I'm, you know, and I even asked her, and me and her were both like, moving on. So I asked her, I was like, what does my mom mean by you're a white girl? And she's like, I don't know. And because we're young kids, we just moved on. And I got older, and I was at another friend's event and noticed I was the only black person. And people were like, oh, how do you know? Oh, how do you know? Blah, blah, blah. Are you guys friends? And it was just like, I could see how they talked to everyone else. And I'd be like, doo, to me, like as almost if I was a baby. And at first, for years, I thought it's because I was short. And then there was finally a realization it's because I was black. So that for me, that's like a big part of my origin as being a black woman. Is like, one, realizing I am black. you know, because every black kid has that moment where they realize, oh my God, I'm black. You're like, geez, what? How did you guys not tell me? You know, me? Me? I'm only like 9, you know? And then you have the moment where you realize you're treated differently because you're black, you know? And you may go through the anger, the sadness, and then you take the moment where you're like, I'm going to change this. And I am no longer a color, or I'm no longer a label or ethnicity, you know? I'm Malcolm, I'm Raina. I am this art piece. I am this song. You know, I don't need to be a human at this point. Just look at this vessel that I put in front of you.
I remember that I was like taking turns DJing, and then all throughout the night, more people would just like come in, come in, come in. And I remember there was a moment where everybody went out to the porch really quick, and my friend wanted to come like grab something. So they were coming by, and then they just saw like all this porch full of black people. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was beautiful. And I just remember the night sky being this like shade of tinge of like purple and like lavender against the black. And you could still see the clouds a little bit. And it wasn't all blocked out by the orange street lights that were on. And I remember just getting on top of this bike that somebody had like locked to a fence or whatever, and I was just like reclining on the bike. And my friend was like, what's going on here? Like, what's happening? And that friend happened to be white and was like, can I come in? And I was like, no. And then I just remember looking back, seeing everybody on the porch talking, like leaning against each other, leaning against a railing to my house. And I remember being like, wow, this is the world that I want to build, but this world is already here. And sometimes I forget it. Sometimes I forget that all of these people exist together in a world instead of like separately at separate times and separate places, different friend groups or scenes. And it was beautiful. I just remember remembering, I'm going to remember this moment for the rest of my life. I think that's when I had an epiphany that I wanted to organize spaces for people to come be together like that. That epiphany, a lot of events led up to that epiphany, and a lot of them were different parties organized by black queer people, black women, and black genderqueer people as well, that just centered blackness and wanted people to come out and dance and have a good time. And I remember that was a time, like all times, where there was a lot of, you know, publication and coverage on black people being killed, and then like faces going around in the internet and on TV screens and on newspapers. And I wasn't thinking about any of that at that time. And I have multitude of things that stress me out and make me existential in life, and that wasn't at the forefront of my mind either. And I felt satisfied because I knew that time wasn't just a particular instance that stopped after it, but it's something that like carried on, no matter if relationships with the same people maintain at the strength they were, or if they get stronger, if they ebb and flow. That'd be with me forever.
That was the most exciting thing that I saw you could do with art, was that you could create a place for people to see each other.
I've always been weird about like sharing my bed with people. Like I don't like sleeping next to people. And for years, I didn't even really like hugging people or being super affectionate. I had a lot of trauma, and everyone just knew, like, you don't hug Selena, you know? And for whatever reason, there was this person that I felt really safe with. And I remember one night they were just like, just fall asleep here, you know? And I was like, this is weird. I don't know if I want to. But then I just did, and I was just trying to let myself relax. And so like I had a few drinks. They had a few drinks, and they put their arm around me and like clasped our hands together, and they just went to sleep. And we were holding hands, and I just let myself like sink into a breath, and I had never felt until that moment like so safe being held. And they're completely unaware about like the level of which, because to them that was easy to do, and for me that was so hard. And to like let go, and then realizing I felt like really good about it, you know, that I wanted to be there, which is why it probably allowed me to like break down that wall for myself. But it was like a big moment, and for me, and so that's like what I thought about, like, and feeling like close to that, you know, like just feeling so like, you know, and like loving that feel of a hand that's like perfectly clasped up in mine, and you know, and I think I always like, I will always be like a part of me will always just like love or be in love with that person because they gave me that moment.
So when I met my dad, it was like a way deep realization of that, and it was like in these ways where we express ourselves the same way. It's like, what? Like, this is magical. Like, this is what it means to be a person in some way. Like this other half that I had, and the half doesn't explain what I realized. It was I became a more of myself when I realized that this person was also an artist and had felt these things and was like expressing them for him through music. But it was like I understand the language, I think.
When people ask me why, it's like for some time it was just like I play violin. It was just a thing I did. But then people became like it became associated with me. You know what I mean? And I didn't understand why, and because people were so touched by it or moved by it. And for years I was like, well, people used to say it's amazing to see a black woman playing violin, and it used to get on my nerves. Like it's like this is 2000 and what? Like you can go on Google and find at least 12 that are famous, you know. But for them, it's not an experience they get to see all the time. It's not something that's not part of their world, you know. For them to see some of your art, that's like, oh my God. But to you, it's like, you know, if you show them the ice cream scoop, you're like, this is nothing. You should see the lawnmower, you know. And they're like, what? And you're like, it is what it is, you know. And it used to be annoying, but now I see like that's my purpose, is to draw that out of people, you know what I mean. And I enjoy it, but I also found like it is definitely my purpose because I'm exhausting after it. So like after a show, it's like, ugh, you know, I'm not willing to talk. I literally gave all of me to you, so I'm a little bit tired, and I'm not trying to socialize for 3 hours about my origin story. I literally just gave all of it to you, you know. But that's definitely what I've seen a purpose, and specifically like in the past 2 years. Also with teaching, you know, anything involving music, I see that like it's such a positive purpose for me and the person receiving it. That's like, you know, it would be dumb not to do it. It's just what I love, and I think what people like is that they can see it. They always say, we can see you having fun, we can see you love it. And all the people I play with, I'm also very finicky about that, because I'm like, I want to play with people I'm comfortable and we love it. And every time we come together, if we had a bad day or we're tired, we all normally come from work and we sit there and we have a beer and we have a great time playing, and we don't complain about work, and we don't, you know, it's an escape as well for us as the performers and for people as listeners. So it's like, it's just a little, it's a nice breath of fresh air for my little spa.
It's like a place. It's like a place.
Like a little safe haven. Yeah, yeah. And I do see it as an intimate moment.
There was just times where I went to queer dance parties, but just dance parties in general. I remember the first time Jazz took me to a queer club here in Richmond. And I remember how freeing the act of dancing was, because it was dark and it didn't matter how I was moving or who I was with or who I was. I could just be myself, and even if people were being weird or staring or, cunty or whatever, I could just be to myself and watch people do that in all of their brilliance and all of their fun. And that evolving from that gay club to Richmond to like dance floors in DC and Baltimore and New York and then Philadelphia, and just really participating in a modern setting of these places instead of when I was younger. And I feel like I was just a passenger, that on these dance floors I was driving my life by being here, by being present. And it felt like every time I was on a dance floor, it was me reclaiming my life, me grabbing control of my life, because I wanted to be there and I wanted to make it, and it felt important to be there to support the party, but I just wanted to dance.
I mean, when I was there, it was just like so strict. I wasn't able to be friends with specific people of like, certain genders or whatever. And, I was like told to dress a specific way. And I was like, they were like, you have to wear a scarf. That's what you're going to do. And it was just like all these things. When I came here, I just had this moment of like, holy shit, I'm like a person. And I can do what I want. And I can like stay out until 6 a.m. like, doing coke, and like I can like do this and like I can do this. And it was just like a like months and months and months of just like a thrash show. Like it was a mess, and then I fucking got arrested, and that shit just like rocked my whole world. And like and I was like on probation for a really long time, and I definitely like even then like needed to get my shit together, but I just like didn't, because I just was bad, and it just like kept going. And then it was just like, I think there was just a point where I was like, damn, I just need to like fucking stabilize myself, because I'm wilding out, like, and I don't know why. And I think I was just like, oh wow, there's like, I'm doing everything I'm doing, there's like a reason. And that was like a really like profound like, oh, there's some shit I need to rectify for myself, that I need like that I've inherited from my parents, that like they've inherited. There's just like so much shit that is like the reason why I'm doing this. And that also helped me to not like blame myself so much, because obviously too, when I was arrested, it was like, I was made to feel like I was just like a fuck up, and like, it definitely was like this like tone of like, you're a horrible person, da da da. So it took a lot. I mean, I deeply internalized that, but it took a while to like undo that internalized shit.
And at this time, it was a cool knowledge that in order to bring together all of what I needed to do for Black Is, Black Ain't, I would have to go through some kind of personal crisis, physical crisis. I knew that. Because I knew that part of that story was about the possibility of death, and that the necessity, because of that, to articulate all the truths that reside within your soul.
When I was out on his porch, I remember my mom just calling me. Pretty sure it was my mom, and just like telling me that. And the conversation was very brief and short, because Joelle and I hadn't seen each other in years, like a very long time. We weren't friends after we were young. And I just remember thinking like, wow, I'm in a position where I feel like other people would be confused if I was like hysterically crying or grieving his death. And that's not the reaction that I had, but I remember being like, oh shit, like this was somebody, when I did exist in this time where everything felt so free and pure and without constrictions of responsibility, like that person grew up, and we grew up in the same city, but certain situations put us in a world where, you know, Joelle could like pass in that way. And I just remember being like, nah. After that, I was like, not me, not my friends. And I was like, not a world where Joelle didn't inspire somebody in that way. And it felt weird to say that he inspired me, because I'm like, do I really know him if like we haven't hung out since we were literal children? But I'm like, no, that was still him. And remembering how invested and interested he was in like funny little things like WWE, and like knowing all the wrestlers' names and like different video games and online games. But there was a spark that was always in his eye that was like, you don't know about this, or like know about this. And I was so passive and like not really thinking about things in that way. But he always had this like investment, this like urgency. And I just remember after that being like, no, I really want something.
It still just baffles me that he made all these arrangements, called the funeral service. The funeral home was around the street from the house, so everyone from the apartment complex could walk. He also got 7 limousines, paid for. Everything was paid for. Stone paid for. He got the stone. Everything. It was ordered already. It was just ready for them to say that he had passed, and it was paid for. Yeah, it was ridiculous. My dad was like, we can't even pay for anything. You know, we can't even, but that's also showing how a black man is. And I got to do this for myself and my family, and I got to line this up. If I die, they at least don't have to do this. At least.
My dad had like such huge dreams for himself, and it's one of the things that him and my mom, like, they worked so hard for. Like, they fell in love and they had like these plans.
Yeah.
My mom was gonna work and support him while he went to cooking school.
Okay.
And then when he graduated and he got the good cooking jobs, then she was going to go to school, and while he worked and she figured out what she wanted to do, and like they had this whole plan, and it looked like it was coming to fruition. Like, he was able to stop selling drugs. He had gotten like this really good cooking position. Like, they had gotten him a fancy phone. We moved to Virginia Beach out of like these like rundown apartments in Norfolk, and it was like, whoa, this is we have a backyard. We're coming on up, And this white woman who managed like the front end of this restaurant, where he managed the kitchen, lied about him to the boss and said that or the guy who owned the restaurant. She was like, he's stealing from the restaurant. And they fired him. And my dad would get these disappointments, and that wasn't the first time like someone who was white lied about him, and he felt really disappointed for like trusting white people.
I think the ultimate goal, yes, is to share pain and have that be a way that we can do that across racial boundaries. I'm not really there right now. And I don't know who is. I don't know how many people are. And I think that there's some kind of healing that needs to happen. In my personal life, it's a way to heal the child a little bit who spent a long time silent, and who spent a long time building strategies that in the end were unhealthy, which was to not speak about problems. And I think once that healing happens, then that opens the door for humans to connect with each other, for Black people to connect with each other. I'll put a pin in this also, because I think that Black people need to be allowed to heal.
And then maybe a month or two later, that owner comes calling and he's like, I'm so sorry that I didn't believe you. It turns out that she was the one stealing from the restaurant the whole time because, you know, the theft continued after we let you go, and would you please come back? We miss your cooking. We miss your ideas, blah, blah, blah. And my dad was like, no, absolutely not. You know, like, and that was like pride because, like, we could have totally used that money. And, like, but his career is like, he was like seeing possibilities about getting his own restaurant, and like he was doing radio interviews and stuff, and then that happened, and it just sucker punched him. He was like, fuck, no, everything in my life is, you know, like, I'm just gonna put it into like supporting Selena, and like, but he was heartbroken. His whole passion for cooking was like gone, you know, and he felt so distraught from that. And I think he always dreamed of like this whole idea of like building this like legacy. He would talk about it a lot. Like, he wanted to be able to leave this life having left something for his family, like, you know, a house in our name, and like take us traveling. He had like all these ideas, and then it wasn't long before his health kind of fell away too.
We have situations where there's like a cookout that gets shut down, or somebody at the pool. Like, these kind of moments cannot happen. I think it's pretty basic. I think they get in the way of our ultimate goal, which I would like to see. I don't know, like, economic freedom for everyone is like at the end of this chain, you know, and like and some real equality. I think that healing first, because communication can only happen after that. I'll say I think that's a lofty goal in some ways already. I don't know how that happens, but I think you see a lot of. I think people are trying to do the healing. I think people realize this, and I think this is a moment, and these moments disappear in history when we are trying to tell stories and trying to let these stories affect change. And people are speaking up maybe for the first time in their whole life about things. People are getting let out of jail on life sentences for stealing $50 years ago. You know, we are having this moment, and I think that's very exciting. But I think there are people who would like to end that moment. You know, and I think it's a complex issue, and I don't have the answers.
And I remember before he went in for surgery, and I think he knew that he likely wasn't going to survive the surgery. And the week before, when MySpace was still a thing, he had changed his whole MySpace, where everything in it was like a history about these like amazing like black men in history, like Frederick Douglass, and he had like little things on, like, his MySpace became like a monument to these black men. And after he died in surgery, my mom contacted MySpace and had them take it down because she found it to be morbid, which made me really upset because I was like, it was like one of the last things he did in his last week of his life was just like curate this weird MySpace page, you know, of people he felt inspired by. And I think that was like his one last way of like trying to make some kind of mark, or kind of let it know like what he had hoped, you know. And I don't know, it just makes he always made me think about things in a different way. And then despite like all his disappointments, sometimes he was able to talk to like in a very hopeful way, but for me, not for himself. I think he had completely given up for himself. And I think a lot of black parents do that, you know? I think they completely have like, and I see it all the time at the library, you know, these parents are like, they don't have any, but they're putting it all in and like really dreaming for their kids. You know, we see it in this neighborhood sometimes, and it's a weird space that we inhabit in this country, that I don't think anybody but us gets, you know?
I think about my younger self because I'm like, what would my younger self want in the future? Like, what would she have envisioned? What is a world where she could thrive and just keep being her? No one can change what happened, but I often think of like how we would turn out without traumatic events or experiences. I know a lot of people believe that trauma and hurt bonds us and shapes who we are, but I think it's more than that. I think it's it's so much deeper. That's like a very surface level way to think about how we grow and experience life. And I often think about and pay attention so much to healing and the things that I do so I can live up to that fullest potential. I want that so much for a future angel that a younger Jafar could be proud of.
I think Black women drive everything I do. Like my mom and my Oma and my aunt, like and foremost, like come to my mind. Just because I want to do some spectacular shit for them, for these women that raised me, and I want to show them that like it's possible to do it on your dream, because I feel like they didn't maybe definitely my grandmother didn't have the space to try to do it on her dream, and then I don't think my mom and my aunt realized that they could do it on their dream. And like maybe if they see that, like maybe they'll step into some of that for themselves more. Maybe not all the way, right? Because some things just get so like embedded, but maybe they'll step into a little bit of it. I had a wild acid trip that lasted for 10 days. I was hospitalized for a week. I like physically assaulted Josh. That's one of the things I remember viscerally. It's like seeing the scars on his body. It was a trip that we did together. And basically I just lost, I like, so sometimes I think about like my existence as like there's a soul, right? There's this like unlimited like God essence, and then there's like my personality, there's my body, there's all this Mahari-ness, and they're like tethered together, and sometimes they're really close and sometimes they're farther away. And I'm trying to live my life in a way in which they're really close, but what happened in the trip is they just got like far the fuck away from each other, and I just completely lost like grounding in myself. And so when I came out of that, medical bills were crazy. Josh was overwhelmed and scared. I was on antipsychotics, and I still hadn't really sat back in myself. I think in a lot of ways, like I'm still doing that. Yeah. We moved to Florida so that he got a job working for NASA so that he could like pay for shit. And so I remember going into the trip, it was winter, and then coming out of it was spring. And it was so crazy because it literally felt like this huge transformation had happened. I mean, so that was a really defining moment for me. I'm still like, I feel like I've only like started to look at or maybe understand 1% of what that was, and the fear and the break and just all of that.
And I was in the hospital for about 6 months, died nearly twice. There was one moment when I had such pain, such wrenching, catastrophic pain. I started to cry and sob and roll back and forth. The nurses couldn't do anything for me. The doctors couldn't do anything for me. My grandmother, who stands by me, had to leave the room because she couldn't bear it. And my mother walked over, took me into her arms like a baby. She said, "Mommy knows, Mommy knows, Mommy knows. Sweet baby, Harriet's come to help you again. Harriet's here. Don't worry, baby. You've seen rivers like this. You've known pain like this. You stepped into the water. You've crossed. You've made it to the other side.
Precious Lord, lead me on, let me stand.
And then my mom getting sick was probably another like huge shift. I mean, things happen in patterns. So my mom getting sick was before the acid trip. That was 2013. And her diagnosis is cirrhosis of the liver, which means that her liver is not filtering the toxins in her body correctly. So she's on medication. There were, certain lifestyle changes that were prescribed to sort of help her body do what it's supposed to do. But she didn't really do too much of that, and so she just kind of depended on the medication. And we don't know if, like, psychologically, maybe she had a split between her soul and her personality, or if the medication caused some kind of chemical imbalance in her brain, or if the toxins in her body not being processed by her liver. We don't know what happened, but she basically, for like a year and a half, almost 2 years, cycled through what I later experienced in my acid trip. So now I think of as mini acid trips that for her would last. In the beginning, they were a few minutes, and then they became a couple hours, and they became a couple days, and then they became a couple weeks, and the longest was maybe a month. And so seeing my mom go through that kind of like psychological like fucking roller coaster, and then seeing her become what to me, I need to think more about this so I can make sure I'm using language I want to use, but in my head I've been thinking, I use the words like become a different person, but that kind of, I don't really like the way that feels. She's different. She's a different woman now than the one that raised me, and I don't know, like, I don't know what that is, right? Like, is that more of herself? Maybe is that a version of herself she was before she was a mother? Like, but those two experiences, I mean, I think I'll be like learning off of those probably for the rest of my life.
Maybe not surprisingly, it actually has to do with art. And when I had the first year that I had moved to Richmond, I was going to BCU, taking sculpture classes, a sculpture class, just in AFO. I had done this piece that was right on I-95, and you know how if you view one of these interstate entrances from above, it looks like a clover. Like there's like an entrance ramp that swirls around to the left and to the right, so that you can enter the highway going, north or south, east or west. From above, it looks like a clover field, and each one of these clover petals is a field of grass that is just a green space on the side of the highway, essentially. So this piece that I did was I created a soccer field. I placed it. I just took Kansas spray paint and I painted a soccer field in this empty space, and it was just cool. I was just doing what I knew, and that was that I had played soccer my whole life in Atlanta. I had quit soccer, gone to school for art, and I knew how to make this kind of mark. I had helped make a soccer field before, as like that was part of the job my mom and I did to help with the league. We went and painted the fields ourselves, And it was like, okay, I know how to do this. I'm going to do a regulation field and put it into space. And I did it all by myself. And I did it at night because it's illegal to like spray paint things, even if it's just the ground. And the sun came up, and it was like it was the riskiest project I'd ever done, but it was a really simple idea. And in the morning, I had like just finished, and people were walking by. There's a sort of when you enter the field, you're kind of above. So these people were walking on the sidewalk that was up above the field, and they just looked down and like saw what I had done, and I saw them look for a while and kind of wave at me, and it was like this thing. Like I knew in that moment, it was just dawn. I was like, this is why I make things. Like in this way, it was like they were seeing me by just seeing the soccer field, and I was like contributing something that like if somebody, I don't think this ever happened. If somebody wanted to come, they could play soccer on the field. It was like I exist for a second, and I think that was how art started for me. It was like a way to be seen, and because I think I spent the beginning of my life feeling like I was either hiding or invisible, and I didn't even start making it because I was black, and this had nothing to do outwardly about being black, but there's a way that by them seeing that, they were seeing like the full me in a way that transcended things I was able to do before. And I think that I was like, this is good. It cost not that much to make. It was very simple. It was a small moment, but it was like, this is worth, this is how I can be with people in a way that I wasn't able to before. It's right at Broad and Belvedere. You know, when you have Broad and Belvedere, and then you keep going down Belvedere, and then Belvedere turns into Chamberlain and goes to the north side. When you go over that bridge, we drove over it today. It's right there. That it was just something that was in my environment. It was right at the edge of what I had explored at that time. And so I walked right to the edge.
My grandmother's family came from Richmond, Virginia in the 30s and 40s, so they were part of the Great Migration. Just like the wave of 6 million African Americans moving from the South to northern cities and West looking for better opportunity. And here we are 100 years later. And now there's holes all over Harlem, like building sites of new things. It sort of feels like the earth is shifting and moving, and things are being raised and leveled, and new things are being built, and old things are being done away with. New groups of people are moving in, and old groups of people are being pushed out. So it's almost like migratory patterns of birds or something. You're witnessing history.
Powerfully for me, all of the works I made that year were right in that area. One was like on the like where the ICA is now, in like a little like little gas station, where like that was one project, and then the soccer field piece that I just mentioned were all on this sort of segregation line of the city that I think has, you know, just fueled my thought for, you know, totally coincidence. But not a coincidence that that's the place that I gravitated to be near certain things and away from certain things.
There is an African burial ground somewhere near 126th Street and the base of the Willis Avenue Bridge. It seems to be some strange staging ground for emergency vehicles and police presence continuously. It's just an odd in-between place that hasn't found meaning yet, that they haven't been able to turn into something depressing, like a Whole Foods or a condo sliver. I've been thinking about that site for a long time, so this is my first pass at it. It's just an exercise of acknowledgement. All I kept thinking about was these bodies with no names and no faces. These bodies that weren't cared about while they were here and still aren't cared about.
So I don't think it was, totally it was not an accident.
I think it's important to acknowledge the people that went behind you, even if they lived the most mundane life. Decisions they made are the reason why you exist. Because my grandmother thought my granddad was cute, she got knocked up with my dad, Like, she didn't think the dude across the street was cute with his straight hair. I wouldn't be here. I don't think things are just random. They're not.
My father was physically abusive to my mom while I was in the womb. And so that pops into my head sometimes, but I haven't begun to distill what that might mean and what I might have to work through within myself that I was in a woman's womb while she was experiencing that. I always knew that my parents were together when my sister was born, but not when I was born.
But what I do remember is when we were there, it was we were staying at family members' places, so we didn't have my mom and dad weren't living somewhere, and I don't have any baby pictures of myself because my mom was yeah, when you were born they took a picture of you, but that was money, maybe $13 or something to take the picture, and we didn't have that, so they didn't give it to us. So she just kind of was you were born, you've always been really sick when you were younger, and you were, and it was just this vision of me constantly having ear infections, just being on the subway screaming, her not having money, just a lot of disparity, and then very soon after we moved to DC or something to stay with my aunt. So I have some childhood memories of going back and visiting Philly, but I actually don't have a lot of memories there. So yeah, I think I don't know what I look like as a baby, and that kind of makes me sad because it's just the disparity was so much at that point.
So sometimes I tell people how I was born, and they have varying reactions to it. Because my mom had me when she was 16 years old. And she conceived me when she was 15. My dad was a couple years older than her. And she was a typical Puerto Rican Catholic schoolgirl. She was skipping school to be naughty with this boy that she was in love with, and she received no sex education. And February 5th, around 1 something in the morning, she feels these pains in her stomach and goes to the bathroom, locks the door, and is just frightened. And next thing you know, there's a baby. And she had no idea she was pregnant. And she gave birth. And I think about that a lot. How, and I remember one time when my mom told me about this, and no one in the family, nobody knew that my mom was pregnant. She had no idea she was pregnant. It was she was one of those people who was I don't know if she compartmentalized the changes that were happening in her body or what, but I remember my aunt saying like she heard screams and a baby crying, and she goes running, to get into the bathroom, and all she sees is like blood and a baby on the floor and my mom crying on the toilet. And she just went into action. And for years apparently it was like a secret from me, like no one told me. Like I remember, like I think when I was a kid, because like kids talk at the playground, they're like, when I was born this, and I wait, they have like these stories from their mom or their grandma, and I remember asking my mom like, how, tell me about when I was born, and she would just kind of clam up and be weird about it. And then my cousin Candace, who her mom was white, and she was my uncle's kid, and when she and I would get in fights, she would just use anything to be mean to me. And I remember during one such fight, her being like, well, that's why you were born in a toilet like a piece of shit. And she was like maybe 3 or 4 years older than me, and I was like 8. And I was just like, what? I was like, no, I was born in a hospital. I seen the birth certificate, and I was just like a kid trying to argue, like, but I didn't know anything. And then I remember and her being like, Titi told me, like, that you were born in a toilet. And I remember being really upset, and then like thinking in my head, like, I'm gonna ask my mom. My mom's gonna be like, that's not true. Like, I was like determined, and I was just like waiting for my mom to pick me up from their house, and I was like, I'm just gonna ask her. And I was like one of those kids, even as like so young, I was very like methodical in my thinking, which is kind of strange like to think about, but I remember being so aware of like, I'll ask her, and I just remember thinking my way through it, and see like her picking me up and seeing her, and in my head I'm like trying to figure out how to start the conversation, trying to figure out the right opening, and then I don't know, I just remember looking at her and just being like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I don't need to know. I don't want to know. It doesn't matter. Either way, she's my mom, and I just made that decision at 8 years old. It doesn't matter. Like, this, like, shame or whatever, why she's not telling me about it. And so it wasn't until I was, like, 16 years old, we're in Virginia Beach. My mom, it was, like, late one night. One of the things I loved was, like, staying up late with my mom and my dad, and they would have been drinking, like, bottles of wine, and they would just start telling me stories about, when they were younger and what craziness they got into, and like, and then every once in a while there would be like a serious moment, there'd be like funny things that they would say, and then there'd be like serious stories, and I feel like I got to know my parents on like a whole other level that a lot of kids don't get. And she started getting really quiet, and she was like, I'm gonna tell you something that I've just had a lot of shame about, and I've been scared of what you would think of me. She told me, like, I had no idea that I was pregnant, and I went into labor, and she was like, I thought I had to go to the bathroom. Like, I thought I was just having a really bad time. And next thing you know, you were there, and you were screaming, and I was screaming, and your aunt was screaming, and, and she was like, I'm so sorry that I brought you in the world like that. And I was just like, I have a confession. I already knew that. I was like, and I told her how Candace told me, and she was like, ooh, I want to go back in time and beat that child. She was like, what? She was so mad. She was like mad at my aunt for like, just saying that, like letting like a child know her business like that. And then she was like, and then I just like held her hand, and she was crying, and I was just like, there's nothing for you to forgive. There's nothing for you to feel ashamed. You just gave me a good story. And it's like, Mommy, I'm a writer. Like, you just gave me like such a wonderful story, and she just laughed at me. And but like she had been carrying that like for so many years, and never got to deal with that. Like I'm sure like so many of my issues and with her and me growing up, like I'm sure there was like so much like unresolved like PTSD. Like she was a child who had no idea that she was pregnant, and suddenly she's a single mom, like, and I often think about like what her life could have been if she had been able to like fully live it. And because she had dreams, she wanted to go to college, she wanted to do things, and suddenly she had a kid, and it was like those, that was the day when like it was like, well, you're not doing that stuff, you got a kid to raise now, you have to get a job, and your life is now about that kid because you made a mistake. So I think about that a lot, and your question made me immediately think about that. And a lot of people put a lot of, I think, emphasis on like when people are born, mistakes or accidents, and like I remember like comments being made about that when usually when people were mad, it was an easy way to like throw an insult at like if they knew that I was a child of a teen mom, and I don't know, like I think there's some part of me that always like internalizes that a little bit, like like I wasn't meant to be here anyways, like maybe her life would have been better if she could have had whatever, whether it was me or I don't know how souls work or how life is created, but maybe like me and her would both be happier people if she had been able to have a kid in her own time instead of how it happened. Because instead, like, we live in this timeline, and both me and my mom deal with like massive amounts of depression.
I want to say it's way pre-parent. Like it's like, what is consciousness? Like, why are we even thinking? Like, why? How can we even ask that question? Like, how did this happen?
Cosmically, I like to think that there's something within me that chose to be here in this way at this time. So I like to think that not only am I in complete control of how this goes for me, but I wanted this. Like I thought this would be fun. Like I thought this would be a good thing to do, so I came. And I'm here and I'm doing it, and who I was born to and how I was born and the relationships that I'm in, everything, like the timing, the atmosphere, everything. I was like, oh yeah, this time in that way, like with all of those pieces, that's what I want to do. So if that's the case, then one, I should probably be enjoying this more, and two, I should probably be braver about it. Like I should probably be taking, again, like becoming my own master, like taking more control over how this is going, because I made the decision to be here. It wasn't an accident. It was not an accident.